right, so we're going to get into a little law here. We've done a lot of business and economics, but we're going to get into a little bit of space law. So, like many of you, I am a child of the Apollo era. I was 1 year old when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. And I was only a few years older when engineers at NASA Mission Control in Houston, including my father, answered the famous call of the Apollo 13 astronauts, "Houston, we have a problem." And they saved the crew using a combination of ordinary items, including, and most prominently, duct tape. Until the day he died, my father extolled the values of duct tape. "Amazing what you can do with it," he said. Today, space is much more crowded. It's no longer the province of a few spacefaring nations. It's a place where a myriad of governments, private companies, as we've been hearing today and we'll hear further today, space tourists, scientists, nonprofits, and academic institutions will soon operate alongside each other. Moon bases and settlements, space mining, gas stations in space, data centers on the moon, pharmaceutical manufacturing in orbit, and a cislunar economy are no longer the stuff of science fiction. We're almost there. On the national security side, we have the race to the moon, with US, China, and India pledging to land astronauts and stay there by the 2030s, and then go on to Mars. And we're at the cusp of humanity becoming a spacefaring civilization where we will be the explorers of the new frontier. So the era of the Apollo boot prints is giving way to the era of commercial space and public-private partnership. And that's demonstrated by the slide I have here. On the left is Neil Armstrong's boot prints, and on the right is Firefly's Blue Ghost lander. It's the first fully successful private landing on the moon, which happened just last year. So the global space economy, including space-enabled services and infrastructure, is over $600 billion today, according to the Space Foundation, with nearly 80% of that growth being fueled by private sector. There are over 11,000 active satellites and almost 15,000 objects orbiting Earth, many of them defunct. And large satellite constellations like SpaceX's Starlink are providing internet services to remote areas. Starlink also accounts for over 7,000 of those active satellites that are orbiting Earth right now. So space is getting crowded and fast. And wherever there are more people, more space objects, there will be conflict. How do we make sure the new frontier does not become the Wild West? The answer is law. Space law will help set the rules of the road. So a little Space Law 101. Since the original space actors were states, the core of space law is international. The Magna Carta, or Constitution of Space Law, is the widely adopted Outer Space Treaty of 1967. Yes, that's right, 1967. So the OST, Outer Space Treaty, was a response to the Cold War space race between the US and the Soviet Union. It was meant to prevent nuclear weapons from being placed in space. It, along with 4 other treaties, lays out the principles that shape and constrain space activities. Some of those principles: freedom of exploration and use of space by all. Use of the moon and celestial bodies shall be exclusively for peaceful purposes, and the principle that countries cannot claim ownership of outer space, including the moon or other celestial bodies. So if you say who owns the moon, certainly not any of the countries. Notably, Article 6 of the OST links domestic legal frameworks with international obligations for private actors. This is truly unique in law. Anywhere else, where international law and domestic law are linked and where the responsibility of public governments for their private actors is so clear and direct. So states maintain responsibility for their private actors. They have to authorize and provide continuing supervision of non-governmental actors. And how do they do that? Well, in the U.S., they license commercial launch, and they license reentry, and they license remote sensing so far. So in between the treaties, we're kind of filling in the gaps with international guidelines and norms like the UN's voluntary space traffic management and space sustainability guidelines. And also the U.S. is leading in this regard with the Artemis Accords, a declaration of principles now joined in by 56 nations, which set some norms of behavior, which are very important to set prior to getting to the moon. One of those is allowing space mining companies to keep the resources they extract. Another one of those, linked to the resource extraction, is protecting cultural heritage, like Neil Armstrong's boot prints or the Apollo landers themselves. But there are many pressing problems for which no norms have yet been set, and they should be. And I'll highlight 3 of those. Space junk is a growing concern. The tiniest dislodged piece of a space object can destroy another object, and that object can then crash to Earth, hurting others below. How can we best share information to avoid collisions and deorbit objects before they become dangerous to active satellites? What kind of proactive evasive measures are okay, and which are too aggressive? For example, right now, are Chinese satellites with robotic arms part of a program that they say is to test space debris mitigation actually an unlawful interference with others' use of space because they disable and remove other satellites? This becomes increasingly important as satellites become used both for civil and national security purposes. Second, how do we inhabit the moon peacefully when no country can own the moon? How do we handle competing interests in key resource areas of the moon, like the South Pole, where there's believed to be ice and water, which is critical to having base? Can one country or company mine a part of the moon and exclude another country from doing so too? How do we simultaneously extract the resources and preserve space history and cultural heritage, like the Apollo sites, which are truly important to understanding our history and humanity's history? If we erase those, we erase the history of our exploration, of our courage, really, as a civilization, and we might see ourselves differently. So the methods we use to live peacefully together on the moon could serve as a blueprint for future settlements on other planets. And 3, I'm a litigator, so I think of these kind of questions. How and where do we go to resolve disputes in space? Currently, there are some international courts where countries can go, but if you, an individual, or you, a company, have a problem, you need to engage your country to bring that case in the international court. That seems a bit indirect. It would be nice to have some more direct methods. And so do we need, as the UAE is setting up, dedicated space courts for disputes related to space? These and many more questions are still to be solved, and if we want to continue to use space for peaceful purposes, or if we want a thriving space economy, we need to solve them soon. Thank you very much.